On July 6, 1940, Adolf Hitler celebrated his triumph in Europe while in Berlin. His chief of staff hailed him as the greatest military leader in history. From Moscow, Hitler's ally, the Russian leader Joseph Stalin, sent his congratulations. In London, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill found himself isolated. Meanwhile, in Washington, American President Franklin Roosevelt remained distant. Over the next 5 years, the dynamics between these four men would shift in unimaginable ways. While their countries waged a war with weapons, these four dominant warlords of the 20th century engaged in a battle of wits. What began as a European conflict evolved into a struggle for global supremacy. Central to this private war were psychological confrontations where they lied, schemed, charmed, flattered, and deceived to prevail. Interestingly, these confrontations occurred not between enemies, but between men who were allies at that time. Yet their conduct was selfish, volatile, monstrous, and politically self-serving, despite the favorable light in which some are viewed today. We will relentlessly oppose them until they learn their lesson. The strategic decisions for the greatest battles in history were shaped by these warlords' duels. They also marked the epicenter of a profound shift in global power, from European empires to two ideologically opposed superpowers, resulting in devastating consequences for hundreds of millions. Obersalzberg in southern Germany, one of the world's most beautiful places, was where Adolf Hitler contemplated the unthinkable in August 1939. Hitler was determined to invade Poland, and his generals urged him to act before the autumn rains arrived. However, Britain and France had vowed to defend Poland. The one obstacle for Hitler was the fear that Russia might also oppose him, forcing a two-front war. This fear was deeply ingrained in Hitler's mind as the cause of Germany's defeat in the First World War 2 decades earlier. His only option was a pact with his greatest ideological foe, Joseph Stalin. Hitler reached out to Moscow, unknowingly initiating a mental duel with Stalin that would determine the fate of the Second World War over the following 2 years. Stalin was highly suspicious of Hitler's overtures. He spent hours studying Mein Kampf, written 15 years earlier, underlining key passages such as Hitler's opinions of Bolshevik leaders like Stalin himself. Never forget that the rulers of present-day Russia are common blood-stained criminals, the scum of humanity. Despite this, Stalin saw that Hitler was desperate for a deal and was offering to send his foreign minister, Ribbentrop, to Moscow. Stalin decided to proceed with Hitler. Hitler's propaganda chief, Joseph Goebbels, noted in his diary on August 22, 1939, that the non-aggression pact with Moscow was perfect, with Ribbentrop arriving Wednesday, allowing them to feel on top again and sleep more easily. On August 23rd, Ribbentrop arrived in Moscow, but Hitler required one final reassurance. He sent his personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, to examine Stalin's earlobes to determine if they were ingrown and Jewish or separate and Aryan. They were separate. Stalin passed Hitler's test. Shortly after midnight on August 24, 1939, the Nazi-Soviet pact was signed, including a secret protocol dividing Poland between Germany and Russia. Hitler called Ribbentrop, saying this would be like a bombshell. However, as Goebbels noted, it was fear of Stalin betraying him that forced Hitler's historic reversal. The Führer felt like a supplicant, believing that beggars can't be choosers. In the Kremlin, Stalin proposed a toast, acknowledging how much the German nation loved its Führer and expressing a desire to drink his health. Yet, like Hitler, Stalin acted out of fear that Hitler might attack him. That evening, he told his inner circle it was all a game to see who could fool whom. Stalin believed he had outwitted Hitler, whom he secretly admired for his cunning. Back in 1934, Stalin had observed Hitler eliminate rivals in the Nazi Party during the Night of the Long Knives and remarked on Hitler's skill. Hitler, however, had no such admiration. Early in his rule, Hitler dreamed of an alliance with Britain's Sea Empire while expanding eastward to build a German continental empire. Only after this plan failed did he consider Stalin as a potential partner. Stalin was the first of the two to be a mass murderer. His reign of terror killed millions. He once compared his victims to the boyar landowners massacred by Ivan the Terrible 400 years earlier, dismissing their memory. Similarly, a week before invading Poland, Hitler told his generals that Genghis Khan killed millions with a joyful heart, but is remembered as a great state builder. Both men saw mass murder as another weapon in ideological struggle. The state, whether communist or Nazi, was supreme, and individuals were disposable tools. This extended even into their personal lives. Hitler had secret mistresses, especially Eva Braun, but publicly no woman could come between him and his nation. One secretary recalled Hitler repeatedly saying, "My lover is Germany." Stalin married twice and had children, but the suicide of his second wife in 1932 hardened him further. Like Hitler, he told an associate that a true Bolshevik should have no family and devote himself entirely to the party. He told his son Vasily, "I'm not Stalin. Stalin is Soviet power." By August 1939, these two ideologically opposed warlords were inseparably linked. 8 days after signing the pact, Hitler invaded Poland. Britain declared war. Winston Churchill returned to the British cabinet. Stalin publicly supported his Nazi collaborator, stating that England and France had attacked Germany, not the other way around. The enslavement of Poland united these two proponents of totalitarian violence. SS units killed 60,000 Jews and Polish elites. This was Hitler's first experience with mass murder and deeply influenced him, showing that his followers would carry it out. Stalin's secret police, the NKVD, experienced in mass killing, committed similar massacres in eastern Poland, including over 20,000 Polish officers and political prisoners, whose bodies were found 3 years later. As their secret police ravaged Poland, the two dictators faced their destinies side by side. Over the next 2 years, in an unmatched mental war, both became trapped by delusions leading to colossal mistakes and the bloodiest conflict in history. Stalin entered the pact with eyes open, never doubting he was dealing with the devil. Yet he believed the pact would provide protection, security, and opportunity. A week after the Nazi invasion of Poland, he told his inner circle that a war was underway between capitalist countries, with Hitler unknowingly shaking the capitalist system. The Soviets could maneuver to pit one side against the other. Stalin also eyed the chance to expand his communist empire, wondering what harm there would be if the socialist system extended over new territories after Poland's defeat. For Hitler, the pact opened the door to conquest. He could now focus all his energy on planning the invasion of France. Goebbels noted Hitler's hope for long-term collaboration with Stalin on October 1, 1939, convinced of Russia's loyalty and Stalin's expected huge gain. But Stalin saw no loyalty in Hitler, remembering Mein Kampf and Hitler's youthful ambitions to conquer Russian lands. In Europe, territory meant Russia and its vassal states. Expecting Hitler might turn on him, Stalin built buffer zones by forcing the Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia to accept Russian troops. He told a Latvian delegation that despite the unexpected turn, one could not rely on it and must prepare. Those unprepared paid dearly. Germany might attack. Stalin also tried to coerce Finland into ceding territory as another buffer. Finland refused. Stalin invaded, suffering disaster. Thousands of frozen Russian corpses soon covered the snow. The Finns were eventually defeated, but only after killing 125,000 Russian soldiers. Stalin sent political commissars to execute Soviet commanders. The real fault was Stalin's own. His terror had eliminated the Red Army's best officers. Goebbels noted the Red Army's incompetence gave Hitler more confidence. On March 15, 1940, he wrote that the Russians would never become dangerous because Stalin shot his own generals. So far, the alliance with Russia had only benefited Hitler. On May 10, 1940, with his Eastern Front secure, Hitler launched his blitzkrieg westward. The German army cut through France, Belgium, and Holland. The British were driven off the continent. For Hitler, it was a triumph. For Stalin, a disaster. Nikita Khrushchev, later Soviet Prime Minister, recalled Stalin's nervous reaction to Hitler's rapid victories. Stalin cursed the French and English, wondering how they allowed Hitler to defeat and crush them. Stalin recognized the German army's superiority and knew the Germans sensed Soviet weakness from the Finnish War. On June 17, 1940, the French government sought peace. The long and destructive war between capitalist and fascist states, Stalin had anticipated, ended abruptly. The next day, as Hitler celebrated in Munich with Mussolini, Stalin begrudgingly congratulated the Wehrmacht on its success. For Hitler, victory avenged Germany's First World War defeat. For the first time politically, Hitler desired a break from conquest and, reverting to old instincts, peace with Britain. Italian Foreign Minister Count Galeazzo Ciano, present in Munich, observed Hitler's mindset. Hitler expressed reservations about dismantling the British Empire, still an important factor in world balance. Hitler was like a gambler who, after a big win, wanted to leave the table without risking more. But Stalin feared Hitler, after his Western victory, would pursue his long-held Eastern ambitions. Stalin embarked on a risky dual strategy, a 10-day land grab to expand and protect his empire while avoiding provoking Hitler. He occupied the Baltic states and Bessarabia, northern Romania, as allowed by the Nazi-Soviet pact. But he also invaded Bukovina, another Romanian province not assigned to him. Hitler's chief of staff, General Franz Halder, noted Hitler's alarm on June 25, 1940, that Bukovina was a new issue beyond their agreements with Russia. At this moment, Stalin's duel with Hitler took an unexpected turn. Stalin received his first letter from Winston Churchill, who had become British Prime Minister on the day Hitler launched his blitzkrieg. Churchill appealed to Stalin to beware of Hitler and join Britain's side. Stalin did not respond, but showed Hitler his loyalty by reporting Churchill's approach to Berlin. Hitler began interpreting these events, Stalin's secrecy in Romania, and Churchill's appeal. Before the war, Hitler had described his secretive thought process to his adjutant. He explained that his brain worked like a calculating machine, with each person presenting a small wheel of information. Pressing a button, he saw the sum of all information. Now, Hitler's calculating machine began forming a conspiracy theory with devastating consequences. On July 6, 1940, Hitler, victorious in Europe, returned to Berlin to a hero's welcome. A magnificent July sun shone everywhere. The city was filled with unimaginable ecstasy. The crowd roared. The station resembled a grand banquet hall. When the Führer arrived, cheers filled the station. On that day, Hitler's army chief, General Keitel, called him the greatest warlord in history. Yet amid triumph, Hitler was increasingly troubled by one overriding thought. He had won the war. So why did the British not recognize this and make peace? He began convincing himself that Britain and Churchill relied on some external factor. A week after this day of glory in Berlin, General Halder recorded a significant development in Hitler's thinking on July 13, 1940. The Führer was greatly puzzled by Britain's refusal to make peace. He saw Britain's hope lay in Russia. On July 19, 1940, in a Reichstag speech, Hitler made a final peace appeal to Britain. Churchill and the British were uninterested. Later that day, another piece of information from the United States entered Hitler's mind. Franklin Roosevelt was nominated by the Democratic Party for a third presidential term. Roosevelt's acceptance speech attacked Nazi aggression. Hitler now saw threats worldwide. On July 22, 1940, Hitler's view was that Britain continued the war for two reasons: hope in America and hope in Russia. Stalin was flirting with Britain to keep her in the war and tie Germany down. Hitler retreated to Obersalzberg's mountains. The delusion grew. Here the previous summer, he had dreamed of a pact with Stalin. Now he suspected him. At the end of July, he announced to his generals the result of weeks of agonized reflection. 31st of July, 1940, 11:30, Berghof. Führer concludes, Russia is the factor on which Britain is relying the most. Something must have happened in London. The British were completely down. Now they have perked up again. With Russia smashed, Britain's last hope would be shattered. The sooner Russia is crushed, the better. If we were to start in May 1941, we would have 5 months to finish the job. It was, as yet, only an idea, but two enormous delusions. The first that he had already won the war, and the second that some secret deal was brewing between Britain and Russia, were leading Hitler down the road to catastrophe. For Hitler, the invasion of Russia was still only a contingency plan, should all other means of forcing the British to make peace fail. The autumn of 1940 now brought 4 long months of frustration. The RAF defeated the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain. Plans for a cross-channel invasion were quietly shelved. Yet despite these setbacks, Hitler kidded himself that he'd done enough. 15th of October, 1940. Führer on military situation. War is won. Rest is mere question of time. But Hitler could still not force the British to come to terms, and he had become split-minded about Russia, moving troops nearer her borders, but also wanting Stalin to join him in the fight against Britain. Hitler's adjutant, Major Gerhard Engel, noted in his diary. 4th of November, 1940. Führer visibly depressed. He conveys the message that the war is won. He has the impression that at the moment, he does not know how things should proceed. Then came the defining moment. On November the 12th, 1940, the Russian Foreign Minister, Vyacheslav Molotov, arrived in Berlin at Hitler's invitation. Molotov was given the full Nazi fanfare, but the conversations that followed were tense. Hitler's purpose in summoning Molotov was to offer Russia a share in the spoils of victory if it helped him finish off the British. He told him, England's final capitulation is just a matter of time. Fragments of its empire will be left all over the world. It's time to think about division of this property without a master after our victory. But so far, it has not been easy. Stalin wasn't interested in joining Hitler's war or speculative carve-ups of the British Empire. His instructions to Molotov were to find out what Hitler's troops were up to in Finland and Romania, places right on his doorstep. Molotov put the questions bluntly. Hitler gave vague reassurances. Despite the superficial courtesies, Molotov's cold arrogance and his needling on the question of territory in Eastern Europe infuriated Hitler, and it reinvigorated him. 15th of November, 1940. The talks had shown where the Russian plans were heading. Molotov had let the cat out of the bag. Führer was really relieved. It would not even remain a marriage of convenience. When Molotov reported back to Moscow on the talks in Berlin, Stalin realized that Hitler was turning against him. In early December, he told his generals, "We know that Hitler is intoxicated by his victories and believes that the Red Army will need at least 4 years to prepare for war. Obviously, 4 years would be more than enough for us, but we must be ready much earlier. We must be prepared for the worst. We will try to delay the war for another 2 years." But Hitler was moving at a pace Stalin could not imagine. On December the 18th, 1940, he issued War Directive No. 23. The German Wehrmacht must be prepared before the ending of the war against England to crush Soviet Russia in a rapid campaign. The invasion date was set for May 1941. But behind the order lay uncertainty. 18th of December, 1940. I'm convinced that the Führer himself does not know how it would turn out. He's very concerned at the lack of clarity as regards the strength of the Russians. Hopes for an English surrender, does not think America will enter the war. Hitler had finally made the momentous decision, a war on 2 fronts, the very thing he'd sought to avoid when he first made his pact with Stalin. But he deluded himself that one front, Britain, was already won. It simply required a knockout blow against Russia for the British to understand their defeat. Hitler's line of reasoning never began to occur to Stalin. He believed that Hitler either had to beat Churchill or make a deal with him before he could think of turning against Russia. In early 1941, he told Politburo members, "We must cherish no illusions. Fascist Germany is clearly preparing for an attack on the Soviet Union. Why does Hitler want to make an agreement with England? Because he wants to avoid war on two fronts." Stalin was trusting Hitler to act rationally, and to fight Britain and Russia at the same time was clearly irrational. But Stalin failed to realize that despite their similarities, there was one profound difference between him and Hitler, which made his perfect logic irrelevant. He himself was a methodical, calculating, hard-working man, a master of detail, personally signing death lists at one extreme and at the other, keeping the tiniest details of gold production in his notebook. Hitler, by contrast, was at heart an idle dreamer. He once described why he loved the mountains of Obersalzberg. "When I go to Obersalzberg, I'm not drawn there merely by the beauty of the landscape. I feel myself far from petty things. My imagination is stimulated. When I study a problem elsewhere, I see it less clearly. I'm submerged by the details. By night at the Berghof, I often remain for hours with my eyes open, contemplating from my bed mountains lit up by the moon. It's at such moments that brightness enters my mind." For Hitler, the big idea was never to be disrupted by small facts. And having made up his mind to attack Russia for tactical reasons, the original and biggest idea of all was reasserting itself: the ideological struggle against Jews and Bolsheviks. Throughout 1940, Hitler had hardly mentioned the Jews, but on January the 30th, 1941, in his traditional speech marking the anniversary of the Nazis' rise to power, he repeated a chilling threat he'd first made before war broke out. At a series of conferences with his generals in the spring of 1941, Hitler made his aims brutally clear. 3rd of March, 1941. The forthcoming campaign will lead to a showdown between two different ideologies. The Jewish Bolshevik intelligentsia must be eliminated. 30th of March, we must forget the concept of comradeship between soldiers. This is a war of extermination. While Hitler planned his annihilation, Stalin still believed he had at least a year to prepare. On April the 13th, 1941, he moved to protect his back, signing a pact with Hitler's ally, Japan. Stalin was thrilled with his coup and got happily tipsy with the Japanese foreign minister, Matsuoki. But he was still following his double strategy. As he said goodbye to Matsuoki, the German military attaché in Moscow was present, Stalin told him. "We must remain friends, and you must now do everything to that end. We will stay friends with you, whatever happens." But Stalin knew such long-term friendship was a fantasy. Soon after, he told graduates of Moscow's military academy, "There will be war, and the enemy will be Germany." But that war would not happen yet. Up until this point, Stalin's reasoning was irreproachable. He'd foreseen the eventual conflict with Germany and was steadily preparing for it. But a bizarre twist would now propel him into his own huge delusion. In April 1941, Stalin received his second letter from Winston Churchill. Like the first, it would have an electrifying effect on his duel with Hitler. Churchill told him the British had received intelligent reports of German troop movements, which could only be preparations for a Nazi attack on Russia. Stalin was instantly suspicious, not of Hitler, but of Churchill. He told his army chiefs, "Britain is threatening us with the Germans and threatening the Germans with the Soviet Union. They're playing us off against each other." Then, on May the 10th, 1941, in one of the war's strangest moments, Hitler's deputy, Rudolf Hess, took off from Germany in a Messerschmitt fighter, flew across the North Sea, and parachuted to the ground in Scotland. At that time, Stalin's assistant, present at his key meetings, was Yuri Chudayev, who noted down and later typed up everything Stalin said. From Chudayev's secret unpublished record, it is possible to piece together how Churchill's message and Hess's flight began to lead Stalin towards a conspiracy theory, which would have immensely destructive consequences for his country. 3 days after Hess landed, Chudayev recorded the interpretation Stalin gave of these two events. On the one hand, Churchill sends us a personal message in which he warns us about Hitler's aggressive intentions. And on the other hand, the British meet Hess, who is undoubtedly Hitler's confidant. What is the conclusion then? Apparently, when Churchill sent us his personal warning, he believed that we would activate our military machine. Then Hitler would have a direct and fair reason to launch a preventive crusade against the Soviet Union. In Stalin's eyes, Churchill's warning was deliberately designed to provoke a war between Germany and Russia. And Churchill was meeting Hess to tell Germany it should strike first. As he brooded on this idea, Stalin concluded that Churchill was not the only provocateur. On June the 5th, he told his military chiefs, "England, France, and America see in Germany the only hope to get rid of Bolshevism, and therefore help the Nazis in all possible ways in their crusade to the east." This deduction that the democratic nations of Europe and America were ganging up on him became a blinding article of faith. Throughout May and June, intelligence reports gave warning after warning of imminent German attack. Stalin dismissed every one of them as part of the great conspiracy to provoke him. On June the 12th, he told his generals, "I am certain that Hitler will not risk creating a second front by attacking the Soviet Union. Hitler is not such an idiot." Millions of German troops gathered within striking distance of Russia's borders. Operation Barbarossa, as it was now called, was scheduled for 10 days' time, June the 22nd. The duel between Hitler and Stalin was reaching its end game. As Operation Barbarossa drew near, Hitler convinced himself he was fulfilling his destiny. On June the 16th, 1941, with 6 days to go, he told Goebbels, "That which we have spent our lives fighting, we will now annihilate. Whether right or wrong, we must win. And when we have won, who will ask about the method?" That day, a Soviet spy in the Luftwaffe sent yet another warning of imminent German attack. Stalin retorted, "Tell the source in the staff of the German Air Force to fuck-ow his mother." On June the 18th, Stalin's two top generals, Zhukov and Timoshenko, pleaded with him for a full alert. Stalin reminded them that Hitler could not attack without a warning. Hitler was now first doing a deal with Britain. You have to realize that Germany will never fight Russia on their own. You must understand this. On June the 20th, 2 days to go, Hitler chose his fanfare for victory, a passage from Liszt's symphonic poem, Les Préludes. Though Stalin still refused to see it coming, it was now apparent to his closest associates that the Nazis were on their way. On June the 21st, one of them, Georgy Dimitrov, was in Moscow. Rumors of an impending attack are multiplying on all sides. Have to be on guard. Called Molotov this morning. Molotov says the situation is unclear. There is a major game underway. On June the 22nd, the same day Napoleon had once invaded Russia, Hitler followed in his footsteps. At 3:30 a.m., the attack begins, the greatest deployment in world history. The Führer is as if released from a bad dream. The nearer we get to the decisive moment, all his tiredness seems to disappear. I'm given a deep insight into his thoughts. We have no option but to attack. This cancerous abscess must be cauterized. Stalin will fall. At 7 a.m., I was urgently summoned to the Kremlin. Germany has attacked the USSR. The war has begun. Stalin to me. They attacked us without declaring any grievances, without demanding any negotiations. They attacked us viciously, like gangsters. Stalin's great conspiracy theory that the democracies were plotting to provoke him was shattered. His misreading of Hitler, the man he'd viewed as a rational strategist, was total. Hitler had completed an extraordinary mental journey. A year before, he had seen the invasion as a tactic to make Britain crumble. Now, the ideology with which he had set out 20 years before had once again taken pride of place. He wrote to his Italian ally, Benito Mussolini, "Let me say one more thing, Duce. Since I struggled through to this decision, I again feel spiritually free." The partnership with the Soviet Union was often very irksome to me, for in some way or other, it seemed to me to be a break with my whole origin, my concepts, and my former obligations. I am happy now to be relieved of these mental agonies. While Operation Barbarossa cleansed Hitler, it only shocked and depressed Stalin. His fury was directed equally at Hitler and at his own generals, whose positioning of their forces, insisted upon by Stalin himself, had allowed the Germans to smash through Russian defenses. This is a monstrous crime. Those responsible must lose their heads. NKVD units were sent to the front to arrest the guilty men. The commander, General Pavlov, was shot. 5 days later, Stalin remarked, "Lenin founded our state, and we've acted up." The Red Army, taken by surprise because Stalin had refused to allow it to prepare, was in headlong retreat. 2 weeks after the invasion, General Halder noted in his diary, 3rd of July, 1941. It is probably no overstatement to say that the Russian campaign has been won in the space of 2 weeks. Militarily, Barbarossa turned the war on its head, and his experience with Hitler also had a vital psychological effect on Stalin. He later remarked, "When you're trying to make a decision, never put yourself into the mind of the other person, because if you do, you can make a terrible mistake." Stalin had lost the mind game. Hitler had outwitted him, but Hitler would be the eventual loser. His decision to attack Russia signed the death warrant of his own dreams of empire and of European imperialism in general. And it would create an unlikely coalition of 3 ideologically opposed warlords to fight him. But the relationship between the 2 great democrats in that coalition began with another mental duel, which ran in parallel with the duel of the dictators. It too was riddled with mutual suspicions, false promises, and evasion. It would shape the destiny of the world too. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to our channel.